You think you know Tibet? That mystical land of orange-robed monks, prayer flags fluttering in mountain winds, and the occasional Instagram photo of Mount Everest? Well, buckle up, because what you're about to learn will completely shatter every preconception you've ever had about this extraordinary place. We're talking about a land where breathing is a luxury, where tea is made with yak butter and salt instead of sugar, and where you can somehow survive an entire month on just 500. If you know the secrets. Most people think Tibet is just another tourist destination, a place to snap selfies with prayer wheels and call it spiritual enlightenment. But here's what the travel brochures won't tell you. This is a place where the very air fights against your lungs, where ancient traditions clash with smartphones, and where the cost of living is so absurdly low that your monthly Starbucks budget could literally fund an entire month of survival at 14,000 feet above sea level. Before we go any further, here's what makes this story even more fascinating. Tibet isn't just geographically isolated, it's politically locked down, tighter than Fort Knox. Getting there requires more paperwork than adopting a child, and once you're in, you're essentially living in one of the world's most controlled environments. Yet, somehow, people are thriving there on budgets that wouldn't cover a weekend in most Western cities. So, forget everything you think you know about high-altitude living, Buddhist spirituality, and budget travel. We're about to take you inside the real Tibet, the one where locals laugh at your altitude sickness while chugging buttered tea like it's an energy drink, where women might marry multiple brothers at once, and where your biggest transportation worry isn't traffic jams, but whether the yak caravan is running on time. Standing at 14,000 feet above sea level, Tibet doesn't just sit high, it dominates the planet's skyline like nature's own skyscraper district. The Tibetan Plateau covers an area bigger than Alaska and Texas combined, sitting at an altitude where commercial airliners typically cruise. When people casually mention that Tibet is high up, they're not just talking about elevation. They're talking about a place where the normal rules of human survival get rewritten. The Himalayas don't just border Tibet, they define it. These aren't your typical mountains. We're talking about peaks that scrape the stratosphere. Mount Everest, at 29,032 feet, is just the most famous neighbor in a neighborhood where over 40 peaks exceed 23,000 feet. That's like living in a city where every building is taller than anything you've ever seen, except these buildings are covered in snow year-round and can kill you if you look at them wrong. The climate here operates by its own rules. Summer temperatures can reach a pleasant 70 degrees during the day, then plummet to near freezing at night. Winter is when Tibet really shows its teeth. Temperatures can drop to 40 degrees, and that's in the warmer valleys. Up in the mountains, thermometers simply give up. The air is so thin and dry that your lips will crack within hours of arriving. Your nose will bleed randomly, and you'll develop a headache that feels like someone is slowly inflating a balloon inside your skull. Water behaves differently here too. At this altitude, water boils at around 185 degrees instead of the usual 220, which means cooking rice takes forever and tea never gets properly hot. The atmospheric pressure is so low that carbonated drinks explode like grenades when you open them, and sealed packages of chips arrive looking like they've been inflated with air pumps. The wind in Tibet deserves its own weather category. It doesn't just blow, it screams across the plateau with a fury that can knock you off your feet. During winter storms, wind speeds can exceed 100 mph, carrying snow and ice particles that can sandblast exposed skin in minutes. The constant wind dries out everything: your skin, your hair, your throat, until you feel like a piece of jerky with legs. This geographic isolation has shaped everything about Tibetan culture. When you live in a place where the nearest neighbor might be a 2-day yak ride away, you learn to be self-sufficient in ways that modern people can barely comprehend. You also learn to value community intensely when you do find it, because human contact becomes precious when it's rare. When the first light of dawn breaks over Tibet, it illuminates a world where smartphones coexist with prayer wheels, where monks check social media between meditation sessions, and where the rhythm of daily life has been refined over centuries into something that would make efficiency experts weep with joy. This isn't the mystical, disconnected Tibet of travel brochures. This is a living, breathing culture that's figured out how to honor ancient traditions while adapting to modern realities. Buddhism isn't just the religion here, it's the operating system that runs everything. About 95% of ethnic Tibetans practice Tibetan Buddhism, but this isn't your weekend meditation class kind of Buddhism. This is Buddhism as a complete lifestyle, where every action, from how you eat your morning tsampa to how you treat a stranger, is guided by principles that have been tested by over 1,000 years of high-altitude living. The day typically begins at 4 a.m., not because people are trying to be productive, but because traditional Buddhist practice dictates early rising for meditation and prayer. But here's where it gets interesting. While grandparents are spinning prayer wheels and reciting mantras, their grandchildren are checking WeChat messages and streaming videos on their phones. This isn't cultural conflict. It's cultural evolution. Prayer flags aren't just decorations. They're a communication system with the divine that doubles as a weather monitoring network. The way the flags flutter tells locals about wind patterns, approaching storms, and seasonal changes. Each color represents different elements and prayers. Blue for sky and space, white for air and wind, red for fire, green for water, and yellow for earth. The monastery system functions as universities, community centers, social services departments, and spiritual guidance counselors all rolled into one. Monks don't just pray and meditate, they're teachers, doctors, counselors, and often the most educated people in their communities. Many monasteries now have Wi-Fi and computer labs where young monks study both ancient texts and modern subjects. Family structures here operate on principles that would confuse most Western sociologists. Extended families often live together in compounds that can house 20 or more people across multiple generations. Decision-making is collective, resources are shared, and everyone from toddlers to great-grandparents has specific roles and responsibilities. The concept of hospitality in Tibet goes beyond politeness into the realm of survival necessity. When your nearest neighbor might be miles away and help could be days or weeks away in an emergency, treating strangers well isn't just nice, it's insurance. Tibetan homes maintain open-door policies that would make security experts nervous, but it's based on the understanding that today's stranger might be tomorrow's lifesaver. Work rhythms follow natural patterns rather than artificial schedules. During summer months, when conditions allow, people work incredibly long hours, sometimes 14 to 16 hours a day, to prepare for winter. During harsh winter months, activity slows dramatically. This isn't laziness, it's intelligent adaptation to an environment where fighting against natural patterns wastes energy you can't afford to lose. The role of women in Tibetan society challenges many assumptions about traditional Asian cultures. Tibetan women often control family finances, inherit property, and make major household decisions. In rural areas, it's common to see women managing livestock, negotiating business deals, and serving as community leaders. Now, beneath this surface of daily Buddhist practice and community harmony lies a layer of Tibetan culture that most outsiders never see, never hear about, and definitely aren't supposed to witness. These are the traditions that predate Buddhism by centuries, the practices that continue despite official disapproval, and the rituals that reveal just how deeply rooted Tibetan spirituality really runs. Sky burial, known locally as Jaitur, represents perhaps the most misunderstood practice in Tibetan culture. While the rest of the world buries or cremates their dead, Tibetans feed corpses to vultures on mountaintops. This isn't primitive or macabre, it's profoundly practical and spiritual. In a land where soil is frozen solid most of the year and wood for cremation is scarce, sky burial makes perfect environmental sense. The ritual itself follows strict protocols that have been refined over centuries. Bodies are prepared by specialists called Rogyapas, who understand both the spiritual requirements and the practical necessities of feeding vultures efficiently. The location must be high enough to attract the birds, but accessible enough for family members who wish to attend. The entire process typically takes about 3 hours, during which prayers are recited and the deceased as spirit is guided through the transition between death and rebirth. Shamanic practices exist alongside Buddhism in ways that create a complex spiritual ecosystem. Before Buddhism arrived in Tibet, the indigenous Bon religion dominated, and many of its practices have been absorbed, adapted, or hidden within Buddhist frameworks. Oracle traditions, where certain individuals channel protective deities to provide guidance for communities, continue in many monasteries and villages. Tibetan medical practices blend empirical observation with spiritual diagnosis in ways that challenge Western distinctions between science and superstition. Traditional doctors, called amchis, diagnose illnesses through pulse reading, urine analysis, and detailed questioning about lifestyle, dreams, and emotional states. Treatments might include herbal medicines made from high-altitude plants, dietary changes based on individual constitution, and spiritual practices designed to restore balance between mind, body, and environment. Polyandry, the practice of one woman marrying multiple husbands, usually brothers, still occurs in remote areas despite official disapproval. This isn't primitive marriage customs. It's sophisticated economic and social engineering, designed to prevent land fragmentation in an environment where survival depends on maintaining viable farm sizes. When brothers share a wife, the family land stays together rather than being divided among multiple households. Now, let's talk about something that will either fascinate you or make you question everything you thought you knew about food. Tibetan cuisine is what happens when necessity meets creativity at 14,000 feet above sea level, and the results are unlike anything you've ever experienced. Tsampa is the foundation of Tibetan nutrition, and calling it roasted barley flour is like calling a Ferrari a car with 4 wheels. This isn't just food. It's survival technology perfected over centuries of high-altitude living. Barley is the only grain tough enough to grow reliably in Tibet's harsh climate, and roasting it creates a shelf-stable, highly nutritious flour that can be mixed with liquid to create instant meals anywhere, anytime. The preparation ritual tells you everything about Tibetan practicality. You pour the tsampa into a small bowl, add butter tea, and mix it with your fingers until it reaches the right consistency. It should hold together but not be sticky. Eat it with your hands, and don't worry about table manners. This is survival food that happens to taste surprisingly good once you get used to it. But let's address the elephant in the room. Or should you say, the yak in the room. Yak butter tea, called po cha, is Tibet's national beverage, and it's about as far from your morning coffee as you can get while still technically being a hot drink. Take strong black tea, add yak butter, salt, and sometimes milk, then churn it all together until it becomes a savory, slightly oily liquid that looks like thin soup. Your first sip will probably make you wonder if someone's playing a practical joke. It's salty, fatty, and completely unlike any tea you've ever tasted. But here's the thing. After a few days at altitude, drinking bitter salted tea that coats your throat and provides immediate calories becomes not just tolerable, but craving-worthy. The fat content helps your body process what little oxygen is available. The salt replaces electrolytes lost to the dry air and constant dehydration. Yak meat dominates protein consumption, but not in the way you might expect. Fresh yak is tough and gamey, so most of it is dried into jerky-like strips called sukutai that can last for months without refrigeration. Air-drying meat at high altitude creates preservation conditions that would make food scientists jealous. Low humidity, intense UV radiation, and constant air circulation naturally cure meat without added chemicals. Momos represent Tibetan comfort food at its finest. These steamed dumplings can be filled with yak meat, vegetables, or cheese, and they're the closest thing to fast food you'll find in traditional Tibet. Making momos is a social activity where families gather to prepare hundreds at once, storing them for weeks by taking advantage of natural freezing temperatures. Chang, barley beer, represents recreational drinking adapted to altitude constraints. Traditional brewing methods create a mildly alcoholic beverage that provides calories and social lubrication without the dangerous dehydration effects of stronger alcohol at high altitude. Chang brewing is often a women's skill passed down through generations, and each family's recipe reflects local ingredients and personal preferences. The role of women in Tibetan society would shock most people who assume that traditional Asian cultures automatically mean female subordination. Tibetan women wield power in ways that would make Western feminists take notes, and they do it while maintaining cultural traditions that go back centuries. This isn't accidental. It's the result of environmental and economic pressures that made female empowerment a survival necessity rather than a political choice. In traditional Tibetan households, women typically control the purse strings. They manage family finances, make major purchasing decisions, and coordinate the complex economic activities that keep households functioning. This isn't ceremonial authority. It's real economic power based on practical recognition that women often have better skills in resource management, long-term planning, and multitasking the various activities that high-altitude survival requires. Property inheritance patterns reflect this economic reality. In many Tibetan communities, daughters inherit equally with sons and sometimes receive preferential treatment in property distribution. Family homes and agricultural land often pass through female lineages, ensuring that women maintain economic security regardless of marriage arrangements. The practice of polyandry, while controversial and declining, historically elevated women's status in ways that monogamous marriage systems rarely achieve. In polyandrous families, the wife becomes the central organizing principle around which all household activities revolve. She coordinates the work schedules of multiple husbands, manages relationships between brothers, and often makes final decisions about family strategy and resource allocation. Modern Tibetan women navigate multiple worlds with remarkable skill. In Lhasa and other urban areas, you'll find women running businesses, managing government offices, and pursuing professional careers while maintaining connections to traditional culture. They might spend weekdays in business suits negotiating contracts and weekends in traditional dress participating in religious ceremonies. Dating and romance in contemporary Tibet blend ancient customs with modern realities in ways that create unique relationship dynamics. Traditional arranged marriages still occur, but they're increasingly negotiated with input from both partners rather than imposed by families. Young people meet through social media, work, and educational opportunities, but family approval remains important for serious relationships. The economic aspects of modern Tibetan relationships reflect practical considerations shaped by harsh environmental realities. Couples must consider not just emotional compatibility, but also economic cooperation, family obligations, and the practical challenges of maintaining households in difficult conditions. Romance exists, but it's tempered by realistic assessment of whether two people can actually build a sustainable life together in challenging circumstances. The festival calendar in Tibet reads like a year-long celebration designed by people who understand that life is too harsh and uncertain not to party whenever possible. These aren't just religious observances or cultural exhibitions. They're essential social and psychological infrastructure that keeps communities functioning through long, difficult winters and provides the social glue that holds Tibetan society together. Losar, the Tibetan New Year, transforms the entire plateau into the world's highest altitude party zone for nearly 2 weeks. This isn't your typical midnight champagne celebration. It's a comprehensive social reset that involves house cleaning on a scale that would make Marie Kondo weep debt forgiveness that rivals international financial summits and family reunions that require planning worthy of military operations. The preparation for Losar begins weeks in advance as families engage in ritual cleaning that goes far beyond simple housework. Every surface is scrubbed, every possession is evaluated, and anything broken or worn out is repaired or replaced. This isn't about impressing visitors. It's about starting the new year with physical and spiritual clarity. Traditional Losar foods require preparation that begins days before the actual celebration. Families make hundreds of momos, brew special Chang beer, prepare sweet treats, and create elaborate butter sculptures that serve both decorative and religious functions. The cooking becomes a community activity where neighbors help each other prepare for celebrations, sharing both labor and ingredients to ensure that everyone can participate regardless of their economic situation. Saga Dawa Festival celebrates Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and death during the 4th lunar month, creating a month-long period of intensified religious activity and community celebration. This festival combines serious spiritual practice with joyous community gathering in ways that demonstrate Tibet's ability to balance reverence with celebration. Shotan Festival, the Yogurt Festival, showcases Tibetan performing arts while celebrating the end of the monks' summer retreat. This festival transforms Lhasa and other major centers into outdoor theater venues where traditional opera, music, and dance performances continue for days. The festival gets its name from the tradition of offering yogurt to monks who are ending their summer meditation retreat. Now, let's address the question that's probably been nagging at you since the beginning. How do you actually live on $500 a month in Tibet? Not just survive, but live with dignity, community connection, and reasonable comfort. The answer will challenge everything you think you know about money, budgeting, and what constitutes a good life. Housing costs in Tibet operate by completely different rules than anywhere else you've experienced. In rural areas, families often build their own homes using local materials: stone, adobe, and timber, with construction techniques passed down through generations. The material costs approach zero when you're using stones from your own land, making your own adobe bricks, and cutting timber from local sources. A typical rural Tibetan house might cost the equivalent of $200 or $300 in materials if you had to purchase everything, but most families build using mostly free materials and volunteer labor. The houses are designed for extreme weather conditions, with thick walls for insulation, flat roofs for snow load management, and interior layouts that maximize heat retention. Urban housing in places like Lhasa operates on different economics but still offers remarkable value for money. A small apartment suitable for a couple might rent for $80, $120 per month, including basic utilities. Shared housing arrangements can reduce costs to $30 or $50 per month per person. These prices seem impossibly low until you consider that heating costs are minimal due to solar heating systems and thick construction. Food costs represent the most dramatic savings in the Tibetan lifestyle. Families that maintain traditional food production and preservation skills can feed themselves for less than $50 per month per person. This includes growing barley and vegetable during the brief summer season, maintaining small livestock like chickens or goats, and preserving food through traditional methods that eliminate the need for expensive processed foods. A typical monthly food budget for a single person might include $15 for barley flour and other grains, $10 for dairy products, often produced locally, $80 for meat, usually dried yak or mutton, $5 for vegetables, preserved or fresh when available, $7 for tea salt and other basic supplies, and $5 for occasional treats or special foods. This $50 total provides adequate nutrition when supplemented with home production and community food sharing. Transportation costs vary dramatically depending on lifestyle and location. Rural residents often rely on walking, bicycles, or motorcycles for local transportation, with costs under $20 per month including fuel and maintenance. Long-distance travel happens infrequently and is often coordinated with other families to share costs. The motorcycle culture in Tibet deserves special mention because it represents practical transportation that's affordable, versatile, and well-suited to local conditions. A reliable used motorcycle can be purchased for $300 or $500 and provides transportation capable of handling rough roads, mountain terrain, and heavy cargo loads. Maintenance costs are minimal when owners learn basic repair skills. Healthcare costs operate through a hybrid system that combines traditional medicine, community support, and occasional modern medical care. Many families rely on traditional herbal medicines and treatments that cost very little and address common health issues effectively. Community support systems help families cope with major medical expenses through mutual aid and resource sharing. Clothing and personal items represent another area where traditional skills and community cooperation reduce costs dramatically. Many families maintain textile production capabilities, making their own clothes, blankets, and household items from locally produced wool and other materials. Clothing is designed for durability and functionality rather than fashion, with items lasting for years or decades with proper care and occasional repair. Entertainment and social costs are minimal because most entertainment happens through community activities, family gatherings, and traditional celebrations that don't require cash expenditure. Festivals, religious observances, and seasonal celebrations provide entertainment and social interaction without individual cost beyond food contributions and small gifts. Getting around Tibet is like playing a real-life video game where the difficulty level is set to extreme, and the transportation options range from adventurous to potentially life-threatening. The good news is that once you understand the system, it's actually remarkably efficient. Assuming you're not in a hurry, and you don't mind the occasional existential crisis about whether you'll reach your destination alive. The Qinghai-Tibet Railway represents one of humanity's most audacious engineering achievements and your most comfortable entry point into Tibet. This isn't just a train ride. It's a gradual acclimatization journey that takes you from sea level to 16,640 feet, while your body slowly adjusts to decreasing oxygen levels. The train cars are pressurized and equipped with oxygen supplies for passengers experiencing altitude sickness. The railway journey from Beijing takes about 40 hours and costs roughly $70 to $200 depending on class and season. But here's what makes it invaluable beyond just transportation. It's often the cheapest way to import goods into Tibet. Passengers routinely bring extra luggage filled with products to sell in Lhasa, turning every train trip into an informal cargo service that keeps consumer goods flowing into the region. Local bus transportation operates on schedules that exist more as suggestions than actual timetables. Buses leave when they're full rather than when clocks say they should, and full often means passengers are hanging out windows and livestock is sharing floor space with luggage. A typical intercity bus journey might cost $15 to $25 and take anywhere from the scheduled 6 hours to 3 days, depending on weather, road conditions, mechanical problems, and the driver's mood. Shared taxi services, using sturdy vehicles like Toyota Land Cruisers, provide faster and more reliable transportation for those willing to pay premium prices. A shared taxi from Lhasa to Shigatse might cost $40 to $60 per person and complete the journey in 4 to 6 hours compared to 8-12 hours by bus. These vehicles are equipped for harsh conditions and driven by locals who understand weather patterns, road conditions, and alternative routes. Motorcycle transportation deserves its own category because it represents freedom, economy, and adventure combined into two-wheeled packages that can go anywhere there's a path. Motorcycles handle rough terrain, consume minimal fuel, and cost little to maintain when owners develop basic mechanical skills. A monthly motorcycle budget of $15 to $25 covers fuel, oil, and routine maintenance for most local transportation needs. Yak caravans still provide transportation in remote areas where vehicles cannot reach or during weather conditions that make mechanical transportation impractical. While tourists view yak caravans as exotic experiences, they represent practical transportation technology adapted to extreme conditions. Yaks can carry 60-80 pounds of cargo across terrain that would stop any vehicle, and they can survive on vegetation that grows where nothing else lives. Now let's explore the attractions and natural wonders that make all the transportation challenges worthwhile. because Tibet contains some of the most spectacular sights on Earth, from world-famous landmarks that draw international attention to hidden gems that remain known only to locals. The Potala Palace dominates Lhasa like a mountain made of architecture, rising 13 stories and containing over 1,000 rooms that showcase centuries of Tibetan artistic achievement. This isn't just a building. It's a vertical city that served as the Dalai Lama's residence and the seat of Tibetan government for centuries. The palace contains treasures that rival any museum in the world. Golden stupas encasing the remains of previous Dalai Lama's murals depicting Tibetan history, and Buddhist teachings libraries containing ancient manuscripts and rooms filled with artifacts that tell the story of Tibetan civilization. Visiting the Potala Palace requires advance booking and strict time limits, but the $7 entrance fee provides access to one of humanity's most remarkable architectural achievements. The climb to the top involves 13 floors of steep stairs at high altitude, making it a physical challenge that leaves many visitors gasping for breath while their minds struggle to process the artistic and spiritual magnificence surrounding them. Mount Everest Base Camp on the Tibet side offers dramatically different experiences than the Nepal approach, with vehicle access that brings you within miles of the world's tallest mountain without weeks of trekking. The Tibet Base Camp sits at 17,056 feet, providing views of Everest's north face and the surrounding peaks that form the roof of the world. The journey to base camp costs about $300 to $500 for transportation and permits, but standing in the shadow of Everest creates memories that justify any expense. Jokang Temple represents the spiritual heart of Tibet, attracting pilgrims from across the Buddhist world who prostrate themselves around the temple in circuits that can take hours to complete. The temple contains the Jowo Rinpoche, a golden statue of Buddha that's considered one of Buddhism's most sacred artifacts. The temple complex buzzes with constant activity as pilgrims light butter lamps, spin prayer wheels, and chant prayers in multiple languages. Lake Namtso, at 15,479 feet above sea level, stretches across 750 square miles of impossibly blue water surrounded by snow-capped peaks that create reflections so perfect they seem artificial. This is one of Tibet's 3 holy lakes, attracting pilgrims who circuit its shores and visitors who come simply to witness natural beauty that exceeds imagination. The lake camping experience costs about $20–30 per night for basic accommodation and meals, providing access to night skies so clear that the Milky Way appears three-dimensional. The challenge of staying healthy in Tibet begins before you even arrive, because this is a place where your body will be operating under conditions it was never designed to handle. Every breath contains 40% less oxygen than your lungs expect. Every step requires more energy than your muscles anticipate, and every day presents health challenges that would be medical emergencies at sea level but are just Tuesday afternoon in Tibet. Altitude sickness affects virtually everyone who ascends to Tibetan elevations rapidly, with symptoms ranging from mild headaches and nausea to potentially fatal pulmonary and cerebral edema. The standard medical advice is to ascend gradually, giving your body time to adapt by increasing red blood cell production and improving oxygen utilization efficiency. However, practical access to Tibet often requires rapid altitude changes that make gradual acclimatization impossible. The economics of altitude sickness prevention and treatment create significant budget considerations. Preventive medications like acetazolamide, Diamox, cost about $30 or $50 for a month's supply and can reduce altitude sickness symptoms significantly. Portable oxygen concentrators available for rent in Lhasa for about $15–20 per day provide emergency relief during severe altitude reactions. Traditional Tibetan medicine offers alternative approaches to altitude adaptation that cost far less than pharmaceutical interventions. Local herbal remedies, including rhodiola root and cordyceps fungi, are used to improve oxygen utilization and reduce altitude sickness symptoms. These treatments cost $5 $15 per month and often prove as effective as expensive Western medicines while providing additional health benefits. Healthcare infrastructure in Tibet is limited and concentrated in urban areas, creating challenges for people living in remote regions. Lhasa has several hospitals capable of handling routine medical problems and some emergency situations, but specialized care often requires evacuation to facilities in Beijing or other major cities. Medical evacuation costs can exceed $20,000, making emergency medical insurance essential for anyone planning extended stays in Tibet. Here comes the part that will either make your travel dreams come true or crush them entirely. Getting permission to enter Tibet is like trying to get invited to a party where the hosts change the rules daily. The invitation requirements are written in invisible ink, and showing up uninvited gets you sent home immediately with a bill for the privilege. Tibet operates under what's politely called special administrative requirements, but what tourists experience as bureaucratic purgatory with mountain views. Every foreign visitor must obtain both a Chinese visa and a Tibet travel permit, and you cannot apply for the Tibet permit until you already have the Chinese visa, which means you're basically buying lottery tickets for the chance to buy more lottery tickets. The Tibet travel permit application process begins with finding a registered Tibet travel agency willing to sponsor your visit. You cannot apply individually. This isn't an oversight in the system. It is the system. The government requires all foreigners to travel with approved guides on approved itineraries using approved transportation and staying in approved accommodations. Independent travel, the kind that makes backpacking adventures possible everywhere else in the world, simply doesn't exist for foreigners in Tibet. The permit application requires photocopies of your passport and Chinese visa, a detailed itinerary including specific hotels and transportation, and processing time that can range from 1 week to several months depending on political conditions, seasonal restrictions, and bureaucratic moods that seem to shift with the weather. The permit itself costs about $50, $100, but the required tour arrangements typically cost $200 or $400 per day. For those few foreigners who manage to obtain long-term resident status, the rules become somewhat more flexible but infinitely more complex. Long-term residents still require special permits for travel to certain areas, cannot engage in activities that might be considered political or religious beyond approved boundaries, and must maintain employment or sponsorship status that justifies their continued presence. Teaching English represents one of the few legal employment opportunities available to foreigners, with positions available in schools and language training centers that provide work permits and resident status. However, these positions often require teaching credentials, Chinese language skills, and cultural adaptability that not everyone possesses. Salaries range from $800 to $1,500 per month, which provides comfortable living by local standards but requires navigating complex tax and permit requirements. After navigating all the challenges, restrictions, and bureaucratic hurdles we've discussed, you might wonder why anyone would choose to build a life in Tibet. The answer lies not in the dramatic landscapes or exotic culture that attract tourists, but in something far more profound. Tibet offers a way of life that challenges everything modern society assumes about success, happiness, and what it means to live well. The people who thrive in Tibet are not running away from something. They're running toward a different definition of prosperity. When your monthly expenses are lower than most people's weekly grocery bills, when your community genuinely cares about your well-being, when your daily rhythm follows natural patterns rather than artificial schedules, and when your challenges are real rather than manufactured, life takes on dimensions that are increasingly rare in our hyper-connected, overscheduled world. The environmental challenges that seem overwhelming to outsiders become sources of strength and resilience for those who embrace them. Living at altitude teaches you to breathe deliberately, to conserve energy for what matters, to appreciate good weather when it comes, and to find beauty in harsh landscapes that reveal their secrets slowly. These aren't just survival skills. They're life skills that create psychological resilience and emotional depth that prove valuable long after you return to easier environments. The economic freedom that comes from truly low-cost living provides options that most people never experience. When your basic living expenses are covered by income that would barely qualify as part-time work elsewhere, you can pursue interests, relationships, and experiences based on personal meaning rather than financial necessity. This economic liberation allows for risk-taking, creativity, and life choices that are simply impossible when you're trapped in cycles of high expenses and corresponding high-stress income requirements. The cultural immersion available in Tibet goes far beyond tourist experiences to include genuine participation in one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations. Learning to live within traditional patterns while adapting to modern realities provides perspectives on human adaptability, community cooperation, and spiritual development that cannot be gained through books or brief visits. This cultural education becomes a form of wisdom that influences all future life decisions and relationships. The community connections formed in harsh conditions often prove deeper and more reliable than relationships built in easier circumstances. When people depend on each other for survival, when resources are shared rather than hoarded, when problems are solved collectively rather than individually, social bonds develop that provide security and meaning that transcend material prosperity. These relationships often become lifelong connections that enrich lives in ways that casual social networks cannot match. The spiritual dimensions of Tibetan life, whether approached through formal Buddhist practice or simply through daily exposure to philosophical approaches that prioritize compassion, impermanence, and interconnection, provide frameworks for understanding life's challenges and opportunities that prove remarkably practical. These aren't abstract philosophies. They're tested approaches to human flourishing that have survived centuries of environmental and political challenges. For all its rewards, Tibet demands honesty about its limitations and challenges. This isn't a place for everyone, and it's not a solution to problems that require different approaches. The isolation can be psychologically difficult for people who thrive on urban stimulation and social variety. The health challenges are real and potentially serious. The political restrictions create frustrations and limitations that some people cannot accept. Tibet works best for people who are seeking something specific that cannot be found elsewhere. Genuine cultural immersion, extreme simplicity, community-based living, spiritual development, or simply the experience of testing human adaptability under challenging conditions. It attracts people who are dissatisfied with conventional definitions of success and willing to trade familiar comforts for experiences and relationships that cannot be purchased at any price. The $500 per month lifestyle represents more than budget living. It represents a different approach to prosperity that prioritizes experiences over possessions, relationships over individual achievement, and sustainability over consumption. This lifestyle becomes possible not just because costs are low, but because needs and desires shift when you're living within community systems that provide security, meaning, and purpose through non-monetary means. Understanding Tibet's realities requires looking beyond both romantic idealization and dismissive stereotypes to see a complex society that has developed sophisticated solutions to environmental and social challenges. The people who build successful lives there aren't escaping reality. They are engaging with a different version of reality that offers both unique rewards and serious challenges. Tibet represents both an extreme example of human adaptability and a window into alternative approaches to prosperity and community that challenge many modern assumptions about progress and success. For those willing to engage with its realities rather than its myths, Tibet offers experiences and insights that remain unavailable anywhere else on Earth. Whether you're seeking alternatives to conventional career paths or simply curious about human potential under extreme conditions, Tibet provides a laboratory for testing ideas about what's truly necessary for human flourishing. The answers you find there might surprise you, and they might just change everything about how you approach life's challenges and opportunities wherever you choose to meet them.